So the story is that when Moshe's at the burning bush and he's getting his instructions about going to see Pharaoh and tell him to let the Jewish people go and all that kind of thing. So one of the things that Hashem tells him right before anything starts is when the time comes and the Jewish people are going to leave, they are going to find favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will happily give them their gold and their silver, and they're going to leave with tremendous wealth. Which raised the question, why is this so important that you have to discuss it even before the mission begins? And we said there's a Midrash and there's a Gemara, and they both give us perspectives on this, but effectively what it boils down to is the question of what's supposed to happen when the Jewish people leave. Is the main thing to get them out of there, or do they have to come out with wealth? So, coming from different angles, but they essentially say the same thing, the Midrash and the Gemara. We don't want a situation where Avraham is going to turn around and complain. You made a promise to me, Hashem. You said that my descendants are going to be strangers in a foreign land where they will be oppressed and enslaved. And that happened. But you also made a promise that they're going to leave with tremendous wealth, and that didn't happen. So to ensure that we don't have this issue, right from the get-go, Hashem says they have to leave with tremendous wealth, and that wealth is going to be given to them graciously by the Egyptians. Then,
don't have to ask for it.
Correct. Then we said, it's actually more than that. Sure. We said that ultimately the debate over here is, are we taking the money away from the Egyptians in order to punish them because of the way they treated the Jewish people? Or are we using the money to compensate the Jewish people for what they went through? And it just so happens that the Egyptians are going to be the providers. And that came down to the issue of them asking for the money, because it emerges that really the point over here is we want to ensure that the Jewish people, when they receive that money, are not just getting it as a handout, that they should actually feel that they've achieved something, that they worked for all of these years, and as a result, they now have the right to ask for what is coming to them, to ask for what they deserve. So those two perspectives, which we offered as options, that either we're looking to punish the Egyptians or we are looking to reward the Jewish people, those two perspectives are going to speak to the deeper message of what's going on when the Jewish nation leaves Egypt. And this is where, as you said, it gets very interesting. Because you still have to ask yourself, why is it that Hashem orchestrated this story? They're going to have to be slaves for a long time, 210 years, and then at the end, they'll be compensated for that, and they'll have tremendous wealth. Okay, so skip the wealth and skip the suffering, surely. Like, who needs it? And so that's why we've got to dig a little deeper and understand what's going on over here. When it says that they would leave with tremendous wealth, it is literal. That means that they were going to come out of there, as the sages described, that every single person had 15 donkey loads of wealth. That's true, that's valid. And in addition to that, much more importantly than that, there's a spiritual process that happens. Now, to appreciate what that spiritual process is, we've got to step out of the story of Egypt, and we've got to look at a broader concept, a broader mystical concept, which is a very fascinating concept, and it speaks to the essence of why we are here, which is probably one of the big questions that people will often ask. So when Hashem created the world, He designed it at many, many levels, and there are many layers to the world. We happen to occupy a physical universe. So that's our reference point, that's our reality. And the truth is that for us, it's difficult to imagine that there's anything else, because this is what we know. But the reality is that the physical universe is a tiny part of the whole experience of creation, and there are many layers and many different realities and dimensions. All of the others are spiritual, and they're all different kinds of spiritual levels. Now, immediately what we think as people is, if we're living in a physical universe, and there are spiritual universes, we immediately assume that those spiritual universes are more advanced than ours. Or to put it differently, because that's probably true, they are more advanced than ours. But where we make the mistake is we think you are probably closer to Hashem if you live in a spiritual universe than if you live in a physical universe. And that's mistaken. So objectively, the spiritual realities are much more advanced, much more sophisticated than our reality. Whatever lives there, if it's angels or other kinds of beings that we don't even know the names of, they definitely have a far bigger, deeper appreciation of Hashem than we do. But it is in this world, and only in this world, that you have the opportunity to connect to Hashem in a profound way. The question is how? How do you connect to Hashem? So what Hashem has done is He's hidden, it's almost like some kind of a spiritual treasure hunt. Hashem has hidden and embedded inside our world all these connection points where there is infinite holy energy hidden inside physical things. So if we know what we're doing, then when we engage with these physical things, we unlock that infinite holy energy. So in plain English, you know what that means in plain English? It means that when an ordinary person goes to work and makes money, their net profit is they made money. When a Jewish person goes to work and makes money, there is now an opportunity that that money could transform into something with infinite holy value. Depends how you use the money and what you do with the money and how you prioritize money. So the moment I take some of that money and I use it for a holy purpose, like giving tzedakah or buying things for Shabbos or ensuring that I have a beautiful pair of tefillin, etc., what I've done is I've unlocked something that was embedded inside that money that is not just physical, it's got this infinite holy value, which means that money is now exponentially greater than all other money that exists in the world. And just if it makes you feel better, that means that I don't have to be a billionaire in order to have absolute wealth. Because if I'm looking at physical wealth, okay, then it's my bank balance. But if I'm looking at spiritual wealth, even a person who has relatively little could have infinite spiritual wealth. Now, the first time that this exercise was ever really done was by the Jewish people in Egypt, because the way Hashem designed the world is He embedded a large amount of this spiritual potential in Egypt. And because there's so much potential there, you've got to balance the score by making it very difficult to find and to extract. And that's, by the way, generally how life works, right? Anything that is more valuable requires much more effort in order to achieve it. So the Jewish people go down into Egypt essentially on a spiritual mining expedition, where what they've got to do is they've got to sift through all of the schmutz that Egypt has and find this holy potential, get hold of it, and translate it from being just resources that the Egyptians have, which makes them, by the way, the world superpower, because they've got so much spiritual resource embedded in their civilization, and it's our job to extract that and reconnect it to where it belongs, which is in the service of Hashem. Now, if that sounds very abstract, it's actually really practical, because all of that gold and silver that the Jews took out of Egypt, not long afterwards, becomes built into the Mishkan, which becomes the home of Hashem. So you can physically see the transformation. This is gold that previously was used in the worship of idols and the personal, self-growth of very toxic individuals. And now the same gold and silver is being used in the opposite extreme, which is to be able to serve Hashem. That's one of the reasons why the first story of the Jewish people as a nation, because there are obviously stories before that of the Jewish people as a family, but the first story of the Jewish people as a nation is exactly this kind of story. You're going to be in a hostile environment. It's going to be difficult to live in that environment. It's going to oppress you. But if you stay the course and you keep your focus, eventually you'll get the upper hand over that environment, and you'll be able to translate things that seem to be so divorced from Hashem into things that are completely aligned with Hashem. And that is the short story of what it is to be a Jewish person. We've always lived throughout our history in hostile environments. Not only hostile because the people don't like us. Hostile environments because the world is not naturally calibrated to suit the needs of Judaism. Just think about when you travel away from a major Jewish center and you try and find kosher food. The world is not designed to suit the needs of the Jewish people. And yet, the adventure of the Jewish experience is to go into those places and to slowly but surely transform them into environments that are aligned with and productive for Jewish people. So we come in the gold rush to Johannesburg, and there's not one Jewish thing, and there never has been here for, for 18, well, more than that on the Jewish calendar, obviously. For thousands of years, there's been not an inkling of Judaism over here, and today you've got a thriving Jewish community. That's exactly what the story is about. To enter an environment that is completely misaligned and to bring it on board. And on the personal scale, That's what we're supposed to do when we eat, when we do business, when we go to gym. Any activity that is not outright contrary to the Torah is supposed to be an opportunity for us to find the holy value inside of it, unlock it, and essentially connect whatever we're doing to Hashem's goal for life. So now the question is, two things will happen each time we do that. The question is, which of those two is most important? The two things that are going to happen every single time we succeed. So let's use a very simple example. You sit down to have breakfast. The food that's on your plate is kosher food. So that means that there's nothing here against what the Torah wants. But that food is not holy food just because it's kosher. I'm going to decide what happens to that food. Am I going to eat like a glutton? Or am I going to eat with mindfulness? Say a bracha beforehand. Be intentional about the fact that this energy is going to be useful for me during the course of the day, because now I can go ahead and learn Torah or do mitzvahs, etc. So that's going to shift what happens to that food. Two things are going to happen if I get this right. Something's going to happen to the food, and something's going to happen to me. Same thing in business, right? If I set up my business in such a way that it conforms to the requirements of halacha, and that when I engage with other people in the course of my business, there's some kind of a spiritual value. So if it's Jewish people, maybe I give the person an opportunity to put on tefillin. And if it's non-Jewish people, we have a tzedakah box on the table and we give a coin to charity and we speak about the values of goodness and kindness and the 7 Noachad laws, or whatever the case is. So two things are going to happen. Something's going to happen to my business and something's going to happen to me. What's going to happen to the item, the object that I'm engaged with, is it's going to change. Before I came onto the scene, it was just part and parcel of the physical reality. Much like before the Jews came onto the scene, Egypt was just a civilization. Yes, of course, it was a great civilization, and they were very advanced people, and some of the things that they achieved, we still don't understand how to do until today. And we know that they were a spiritual, albeit an unhealthy spiritual nation, but they had their whole plethora of deities that they served, etc. They were a civilization that existed before we came. What always happens when the Jews arrive in a place, and this is why people don't like it so much when we arrive, is we start to change the landscape. And we start to have an overt and a covert influence on those around us. Until eventually, wherever we go, people start to adopt some of the philosophies that we espouse. And that's why they speak today even about Judeo-Christian values, because Jewish values have seeped into society, into broader society. So something's going to happen to the place. Something's going to happen to the thing. It's going to be transformed. It's going to be elevated. It's going to be unlocked from being a purely physical entity to become a potentially holy entity. That's a major shift. Now, there's no question about it. If I'm the person who facilitates that, something's going to happen to me. There'll be a benefit to me, because I'm doing in this piece of the world what Hashem intended for this piece of the world. So surely that's going to be to my benefit. Surely that's going to aid my spiritual progress. So those are the two things that are happening. There is the reconstitution of the reality, the item, the object, in this case the civilization, and there's the shift of me as a person. Question is, which is more important? In other words, are we living in this world because our goal is to make a difference to the world? Or did Hashem design a world that would allow us opportunities to make a difference to ourselves? That's really the question. Which, let's feed that question back into our original question. Our original question was, when the Jewish people leave Egypt and they have this great wealth, which is Egyptian wealth that is transferred to them. So our original question was, what's happening here? Are we punishing the Egyptians for all of the time that they made our lives so difficult? That's why we're taking away their wealth. And then we've got to give it to somebody. So, well, the most appropriate people to give it to must be the Jewish people, because they're the ones who suffered. Or is the whole purpose over here that there's a priority to ensure that the Jewish people feel compensated for all of their years of suffering? So therefore we're going to give them great wealth. But we've got to get that great wealth from somewhere. So where are we going to get it from? Well, the Egyptians have great wealth, and they happen to be the perpetrators, so we'll take their wealth. That was our original question. And in resolving that question, we came to the conclusion, based on both the Midrash and on the Gemara, that the objective is most important is we have to satisfy the fact that the Jewish people should feel that their 210 years in Egypt were not wasted, that it actually earned them something. And therefore the main thing is they should be compensated. And that's why right at the beginning, before Moshe begins his mission, he is told that the time will come where Egypt will look at the people favorably and give them the gold and silver. And then later on, he's told not only will they give it to them, but you'll actually be in a position that you could ask for it and demand it, and that will be acceptable within the society because they'll recognize that you deserve it. In other words, the primary focus over here is to recognize you have done something which is valuable, and therefore you deserve to have a reward for having done something which is valuable. That was the conclusion we arrived at, which basically now means this. Our neshamas, our souls, before we entered into this world, were very spiritually advanced. There's no question about that. They had a very close connection to Hashem, a great awareness of Hashem. And for a soul to enter into the human experience is actually a very limiting, claustrophobic experience. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was arrested by the Stalinist government in 1927, describes in his personal diary that when they locked him in the cell, which was very small and very dark and filthy, and of course, in those days, when in Stalin's Russia, you didn't know if they would ever open the door ever again, let alone, if you'd be freed. So the previous Rebbe writes that that was the first time that he had a real appreciation for what it must feel like for a soul to enter the human body. It's an incredibly limiting experience. Think about it. A neshama is a spiritual entity. It doesn't get tired, doesn't get hungry, it's not ADD, it doesn't have all these problems. You put it inside the body, and now it wants to achieve spiritual things, but the body kind of gets in the way. So in the book of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe makes a very, very interesting observation. He says, the neshama does not require any improvements. The neshama was good before it entered into this world. So therefore, the neshama is not coming into this world to improve the neshama, because the neshama doesn't require any improvement. So why is the neshama in this world? To make a difference to the world. Now that could give you the impression that the soul is the means to the end. The goal is that the world should benefit, because the world should be uplifted, and the world should be upgraded, and the world should be transformed. And we are just the service providers. We're the catalyst to ensure that that's going to happen. That's what you could think. That's why this story is so important, because this story contextualizes for us that, of course, we're making a difference to the world. There's no question about it. And as we made a massive difference to Egypt, and by the way that you could see that Egypt was transformed is that they never recovered as a superpower. So effectively, everything they had was removed and was transferred elsewhere, and was, reconstituted as something holy and meaningful. But you could think that that's really the goal, right? That the goal is to fix the world, and we're just the worker bees. So this story comes to tell us, actually, the way that Hashem has set it up is we go out into the world, we have the challenge of living in the world. It's not so simple to align ourselves with Jewish values in a world which isn't naturally that way. And it's going to take us a lot of effort, but we are going to make a difference. Every single one of us is going to make a difference. Just a question of how much difference. But we're all going to make a difference to the world. There's going to be some pocket of the world that is fundamentally changed because we were there. Because in that space, we did mitzvahs, and we gave tzedakah, and we studied Torah, and whatever the case is. There's going to be a part of the world that's going to be elevated as a result. But we shouldn't believe that that's the end of the story, or that's the ultimate goal. That's why, right at the beginning, Hashem has to clarify for Moshe, the ultimate goal is you have to be enriched. That's the ultimate goal. Yes, your neshama does not need any improvement. That's true. But there's a Yiddish expression, which you don't even have to translate, because it pretty much sounds like English. As gut is besser nicht besser. Right? If something is good, surely better is even better. So it's true that the soul doesn't need improvement. That doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity to upgrade the soul, to elevate the soul. That's not a matter of improving it. It's not that there's something lacking. It's just that the experience of relationship with Hashem is an infinite experience. And so when my neshama, with all of its great potential and all of its great power, enters this world and then goes through the challenges of living as a Jewish person in this world and aligning myself with the Torah and mitzvahs that don't come easily in this world, what's the net result going to be? My neshama will be exponentially greater than it was before it started. And it was great before it started. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole reason why Hashem sent us into this world. not so that the world should benefit. That's a side benefit. The primary reason is that we should benefit from this experience. Now that's got a very useful take-home message for us, because what happens a lot is people look at what Judaism's expectations are, and then they look at what their reality is. And they usually come to the conclusion that the expectations are out of touch with my reality. So I can't really do all of those things. I'm doing my bit. People often say that, right? I'm doing my part for Judaism, but I can't go all in. You don't understand my reality. If you knew my reality in terms of my responsibilities to my family, my responsibilities to my business, and so on and so forth, so you can't really expect that I'm going to be a full-blown, dedicated, observant, 613 mitzvah Jew. I'll just keep doing my little bits, I'll do the best I can. This should fundamentally shift our perspective. Because if the goal of creation was that we, as Jewish people, should have a positive impact on the world, then you could shrug your shoulders and say, I don't know. I don't know if I'm strong enough to have a positive impact on the world. But when you recognize that the goal of creation was that the world should facilitate our spiritual growth and development and our improved connection to Hashem, then if the world was designed to facilitate that, it's not possible that anything in the world could be an obstacle to achieving what we need to achieve. The world was designed with the purpose of facilitating our Jewish and spiritual development. If we keep that in mind, it will greatly help us every time we feel, I don't know if I could do this. I don't know if the world is aligned with the value system that I'm supposed to uphold. And so that's why right at the beginning of the story, not the beginning of the story of Egypt, but the beginning of the story of the Jewish people, you've got Hashem telling Moshe, you need to know, the ultimate goal is for you to be enriched. I designed the world for you to be enriched. Therefore, you can never imagine that the world will make it impossible for you to get there. It might make it difficult, but ultimately that's how we achieve things, when we push against things that are not easy. Nothing meaningful in life happens just by chance or just automatically. So we shouldn't be afraid of the fact that it feels difficult, as long as we acknowledge the world is designed to assist me to enrich my spiritual path. Therefore, there's nothing in the world that can stop me.